For all things Halloween, this is hauntformer, and welcome, ladies, gentlemen, creeps and freaks, and whoever else might be watching. Welcome to my discussion, review, talk, whatever you want to call it, for Creepshow, Shudder's Creepshow Season 2. If you remember, a little over a year ago, I did my discussion and review of Season 1, and I only felt it was fitting to talk about Season 2 now, as Season 3 is approaching in like 10 days or something crazy. It's fantastic how fast this show is coming out. There was also a Christmas special back in December that I also did a review of, so if you want to check that video out as well, I'm not going to stop you. Go ahead and check it out, but maybe after this, because you're already here and you might as well chill with me now. This video is going to be a lot of talking, so if you're into more of the visual components, this isn't the most idyllic video for you. This is almost more of like a podcast, where I'm just going to be kind of giving my thoughts on the series, on each individual episode, and within each episode, each segment of the show, because if you know how Creepshow is laid out, there are two stories, two segments per episode, and with Season 2 specifically, there are a total of 5 episodes, which is one less than Season 1, but that's okay, that's fine. With a total of 9 segments, 2 segments in 4 of the episodes, and the final episode being one long narrative that takes up the whole 40-ish minutes, give or take. I have a list on my phone of all of the segments, so it, jogs my memory of what I need to talk about. It's been a little bit since I've watched the season. I actually wanted to talk about this show a few months ago, but despite me not having seen it, what I wanted to talk about is still pretty fresh, and it's a good segue for me and for you to recap going into Season 3, even though this is an anthology show and it doesn't really connect in any way. I still like to know what I'm working with jumping into Season 2. So overall season thoughts, it was a solid season, a lot of good episodes. I feel like it's hard to say whether Season 1 or 2 is better. I think overall I liked more of the segments from Season 1, but that doesn't degrade the segments from Season 2. I just feel like some of them weren't as original or as powerful. This season felt more like homage to Creepshow and to the EC comic world, and that's fine. But I feel like Creepshow fans really appreciate the originality of the twists and of the ideas, the creativity, and that, while it was on display in some of the segments, I feel like some of them were a little lackluster. And I mean, there has to be a fine line with all of these, repeat shows in terms of the homage and offering new ideas. I failed to address the animated series, or the animated episode that Creepshow did. It was like a special, which also had some original ideas too. That wasn't technically a part of Season 2, so I'm not going to really bring up those segments here today. I can do a video on that if you'd like to see it. I don't know if you want to, but if you'd like to see it, I can talk about that. But with the Christmas special, with the animated special, with Season 1, there were a lot of unique ideas, and the same can be said for Season 2, but some stuff dipped more into homage than it did into those original premises. Also, though, a positive of Season 2 is that it had a much higher production value, and I only can imagine that is a result of Season 1's success and an increase in budget, therefore better equipment, better camera direction. I don't know. I know Greg Nicotero produced and directed some of the segments, so it's not really a surprise that he did a good job, because he's done a lot of fine work in the past. And another thing to always bring up are the special effects. Not just the gore, but the monsters, the masks, the designs. Really cool stuff put on display in this season, and with those ideas that were really original, the effects also really shone through too. So, let's jump into the ideas, let's jump into the segments, and we will get down to talking about each of these episodes and what I liked, what I didn't like. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy online talking about Creepshow. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and what was your favorite segment from Season 2. Because going into Season 3, we gotta stick with what we love and hope for even better. And just as like a recap, my favorite episode of Season 1 was, I don't recall the name of it, but it was the one with the leeches that suck the fat out of people. I just really love that idea, and that zany blend of comedy and horror is what I look for in Creepshow, and Season 2 did deliver on a lot of those premises. So, first episode was Model Kid, a really classic way to kick off the season because it felt just so Halloween-y. And even though the season didn't come out around Halloween, not like Season 3 will, I do feel like this episode was a bit of homage to the classic world of the Universal Monsters, to the model kits, and to the fans, really, of horror. It talks kind of about how some people who really appreciate horror are kind of seen as outcasts and aren't as respected. They're not, you know, the tough people or whatever you want to call it in this episode. One thing that I really appreciated in this episode were the performances. I mean, obviously Ethan Hawke was in the episode, which is pretty awesome. They always seem to pull in some stars for each of the seasons, and Ethan Hawke is no exception to the star roster. I really like his portrayal of the kind of jerky stepdad. But the kid, too. The child actor was actually really impressive. I admire his work a ton in this episode, and he did a really fantastic job. I'm pretty sure I even DM'd him after and let him know he did a good job, and he was responsive and very thankful. So, to see that talent be put on display is quite cool to see. Of course, with the premise of the models coming to life and attacking the stepdad, classic Creepshow. A lot of those EC comics fall into like the revenge category, and this was plain and simple by the numbers, but that's not a bad thing because sometimes those fundamentals just work and you can't screw it up. Model Kid is a good example of that. But let's move on to the other episodes, because while Model Kid was like a good baseline, there are some that get a little bit worse and a little bit better than the first initial segment, because the second half of the episode was Public Television of the Dead, which, when I talk about homage, this is like as homage-y as you can get. This was plain and simply a wannabe Evil Dead spin-off, right down to Ted Raimi being in the episode with the Necronomicon. And with Season 3 on the horizon, with the trailers coming out, we can see glimpses of the ball from Phantasm. So if this episode, this segment in particular, is any consolation to what we could expect, don't be surprised if we see a whole segment about Phantasm, because this was clearly an Evil Dead-inspired segment. And that's not a bad thing, but I do think it dipped its toes a little too heavy into just being Evil Dead, as opposed to being Creepshow's Evil Dead, if you get what I mean. It didn't really have the payoff you'd expect to see in a Creepshow episode, but I do love the comedy sprinkled in, especially with the character that resembled Bob Ross. I think that was a really clever idea, and it was executed well. The makeup was fantastic. You have all of the imagery that you want to see in the Evil Dead style of things, and a show, like a public access television show, is a really great location and idea that can spark some horror, can spark some originality and fun, and I really think this segment, and really this entire first episode of Season 2 in particular, was just having fun. And you can't really fault that, because Creepshow has always been about having the most fun while being scared at the same time. But now let's move into Episode 2, which started off with actually one of my favorite segments of Season 2, Dead and Breakfast. Which, if that name lends its hand, you know you're in for a treat with a name like Dead and Breakfast. This is one of the more original ideas. It's more modern, I guess, where some of the other episodes, like the model kid in particular, is kind of like harkening back to the old days of media. This episode is completely modern. You have stuff like live streaming and social media and popularity because of online success. It's about this streamer girl that's like into like that true crime and ghost story kind of thing, much like a lot of YouTubers you see today, who goes to this creepy bed and breakfast and wants to capture some ghosts on camera, but of course she kind of realizes that there are no ghosts and it's kind of a scam, and she gets mad and she wants to leave, and of course the owners are like, no, stay, because they're getting a lot of popularity and they're getting rooms booked because of this girl staying there, and then things take a turn for the worst. And I really liked the simplicity of the episode. Despite the modern tie-ins, it was just a very classic case of a misunderstanding gone wrong and the effects that come from greed and selfishness. It's just like those old EC comics, even with the ending where it kind of has that bittersweet sting to it. I really enjoyed the episode. The performances were good. Some of the acting's a little hammy, but I expect that from Creepshow because they always push it to like 150%, and I'm fine with that. I think we need a little bit of that. So much media today, I'm not going to make this a huge rant, but I have to address it a little bit. So much media today is so serious and dour sometimes and gritty, and especially in the horror world, things are trying to be so realistic, and there's so much dourness and I don't know, it feels more gritty, whereas Creepshow is kind of like this light beacon in the darkness of just saying, we have wacky concepts, it may not scare you, but we're just having fun with the horror, and I appreciate it. I think Dead and Breakfast is a great case of Creepshow done right, and it's one of my favorite segments from the show, and it may be my favorite segment of Season 2. Once I kind of re-experience these episodes with you in this discussion, a new favorite may pop up later in this video, because there are other great segments, but this one was just what I like to see when I watch Creepshow, and I could easily see this one being, if Creepshow ever became like a new adaptation for a movie, this could definitely be a segment that would lend its hand well for a film adaptation of it. Up next is Pesticide, which is another by-the-numbers Creepshow segment, and I think this is a lot of fan service too, because Shudder and Greg Nicotero, they know what the fans of Creepshow want, and they deliver it. This is another episode of it being done right. You have a pest control guy who's kind of a sleaze bag, if you will. He actually puts bugs back into the homes after he cleans it, so that way they have to call him again and he, makes more money. And he gets this deal with this guy, this very mysterious stranger, to do some cleaning. Now, one of the issues I had with this episode is that there was a kind of a weird contrast between what was actually happening in real life and what was happening in this character's head and like his dreams, because it was very clear in the original Creepshow film what was in the minds of the characters and what was actually happening, and usually the bizarro weird stuff was actually happening. And in this episode, most of the horror and the weirdness of like the large rats and the animals and such, bugs or what have you, was in the character's head, and I would have liked to have seen more of that kind of actually happening in the world of this character. But regardless, the effects were fantastic. The giant rat was really creepy, and just the idea of the exterminator meeting this guy to do this task was intriguing to me. I liked the whole subplot of him putting the bugs back into the homes. It's what you want to see in terms of that EC style of the revenge that I appreciated, and I think a lot of fans did too. Was it as good as Dead and Breakfast? That's hard to say. I don't know. I think I like Dead and Breakfast a little bit more. It was a little more original in some regards, and a little more complex, I guess, whereas the Exterminator one was kind of simple. But this was a really solid episode from the season, with both of the segments being pretty prominent and special, at least to me. Up next, we have The Right Snuff, which was certainly an episode I was excited for. Of course, it being set in outer space. You have these two astronauts out in the middle of space, and they're gonna make this very big discovery. And one of the astronauts feels kind of snuffed out, kind of snubbed, because he doesn't get the popularity and the credit that he deserves. So when it comes time to actually meet alien life forms, he does some bad stuff, and then the world ends. I really don't want to give too much away because I don't want to spoil it completely in case you haven't seen the episode, but I kind of have to dip my toes into spoilers to explain these plots and what I liked and what I didn't like. But the revenge at the end, it felt a little like it was targeting the wrong person. I wanted to see, and what I think fans wanted to see, is this guy get his comeuppance for doing the wrong thing. That's kind of the morality setup of these Creepshow segments. And in this, it blew up the world. Like, everybody died because of this one guy's bad mistake. What I would have liked is for him to go meet the aliens, but they were actually hostile, and it was like a trap, basically, and they attacked him, and because he was greedy and because he was selfish and killed his fellow astronaut, now he gets punished too by these alien creatures. But even with that said, a very strong episode nonetheless. Both of the actors were very convincing. I really like how they made it look like it was in space. Cinematography and the set design especially was really cool. A lot bigger in scale than a lot of the other Creepshow episodes. And the aliens at the end, though I wasn't a huge fan of the voiceover, not maybe the voice itself, but just kind of the cheesiness of it, I really loved the design of these aliens. Really cool stuff. They put a lot of time and effort into it, and it pays off. To see the practical effects on display is super impressive, and that is, again, another reason why I love this show, and why I love this smaller scale stuff on Shudder, because it lets them experiment with it and just go hog wild. Why not? It's Creepshow. Duh. Sibling Rivalry is up next. This was a weird episode, or a weird segment, I should say, because it definitely wasn't bad. I don't think any of these segments were really bad. There's one that I kind of was a little let down with, but not this one. But this one, it lended itself to the horror and the comedy, but I feel like its premise was a little constricted. I feel like they should have let the characters breathe a bit. Essentially, you have a brother and sister combo where I believe it's the sister thinks that her brother is a vampire. But what I would have liked to have seen is both of them accusing one another to really get that tension and suspense. This one lended itself a little too much into the comedy and the over-the-topness, which, don't get me wrong, I love that in Creepshow. But when you have a setup for what could be suspense, like you have one kid sit in, tell the teacher, look, I think my sister's a vampire, gets up, leaves. A few minutes later, the brother comes in, we already think he's suspect, and then he says, my sister's a vampire. Now you have a whose word is right. That makes for an interesting, compelling story. But this one, it kind of skipped over that interesting plot and just got into the blood and the vampire stuff, which is fine, but I would have liked to have seen a more fleshed out story, because there was something there that really could have worked, and it was a little upsetting to see it get stripped away. This is another one where I think it could lend itself well to a movie if they wrote it a little bit stronger with the characters and added more tension. Then you have the over-the-top comedy, and it breaks the tension, making for an even funnier experience, but you have to get that original initial tension right. But Sibling Rivalry was not a bad segment at all, just something I thought could have been handled a bit better. Now we're moving on to the last few segments. This is the 4th episode of the season, the first segment being Pipe Screams. Pipe Screams is, in many ways, it reminded me of the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill from the original Creepshow, but switching out the meteor crap, to put it family-friendly on my channel, to hair and gunk in a drain pipe. So essentially the story is that this really rude landlord lady, the actress is a very prominent, famous horror actress, and I just can't think of her name off the top of my head, and it's really annoying. Barbara Crampton. It just popped in. Barbara Crampton. Very popular actress from the 80s. She plays this really rude, unforgiving landlord, and the residents are having problem with stuff being clogged in the drain. She hires a plumber, similar to the Exterminator episode, which was a little overlap, but that's fine, to get the hair out, and the hair kind of attacks him. Really great effects. This one really got under my skin because that nasty gunk inside of the drain really creeps me out, and this is called Creepshow after all, so perfect. The gunk attacks him, and so all of the tenants decide to use that gunk against the landlord, and it gets her in the end. So again, you have that similar setup in Creepshow. You would think that kind of that revenge plot would get old fast, but for some reason with these unique different ways of achieving that in the Creepshow show, it keeps it fresh each time. And with these new characters and actors being introduced, it keeps it likable and fresh. This episode, like the first couple segments from this season, was also kind of a back-to-basics formula for Creepshow. It was also very reminiscent of The Crate with Fluffy in the sense of this one annoying character gets the monster to attack them in the end, kind of people using the monster against the bad person in this case. And like I said, it mixes the Jordy Verrill plot with the Fluffy Crate plot. So obviously when you have those two things, you're doing something right in the Creepshow world, and this was also a pretty prominent episode in the season. The second half of this episode is where things kind of went down for me. This was the only segment that I was like not the biggest fan of, and it's weird too. Perhaps I need to rewatch it, but I didn't care for this segment as much. Within the Walls of Madness is about, it reminded me of The Thing, about a research post in like Antarctica, and they have this creature contained, and the segment is basically about people trying to let it out or trying to take credit for it. Kind of went back to the Alien episode, you know, with the right snuff, in the sense of like people are wanting to stake their claim in this discovery, and they start to turn on one another. My issue is it really dove into a lot of the monster stuff and not enough of the conflict stuff. That was kind of like almost in hindsight thing. And I know these segments are really fast. I really think this could have done better with more time, but for what little time they had, they didn't make much use of having these characters feel like they knew one another. They were just kind of thrown in with the monster thrown in, and the monster's not bad or anything. It's just like you expect something more, and it just kind of ends. And it's just kind of, there it is. There's a monster in Antarctica, and they were mad at each other. Could have been a more original concept. This one could have been a 40-minute episode like the final episode, but I do think that final episode was well worth it. Let's dive into talking about that last segment, which I want to make sure I get the name of it right. Night of the Living Late Show. Talk about a season finale. This was that right blend of originality and homage. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So it opens, like, you know how each episode opens with the creep? It opens with like a POV footage of it as if Night of the Living Dead was a video game, and you have the creep basically shooting zombies, which I thought was awesome. The actual segment is about a husband and wife, the husband being an inventor who makes this, it looks like a tanning bed, basically, with VR, and it makes you feel like you're in the VR experience. And he goes into different movies that he likes, and it's really cool. However, they made it work because the actor is actually talking to, like, Christopher Lee in the film. It's not Terror Train, but it takes place on a train. And they have a dialogue, and it works so well. I need to watch the original movie to see how they intercut that, because it fits perfectly. And basically, the character goes into a movie that he likes, and is able to interact with the characters for real. And one of the characters, who's this woman he had a crush on, I guess, forever, and he cheats on his real wife with this character in the movie. And so the wife gets back at him in the end by switching out that movie for, I think it's like Night of the Living Dead, or at least some zombie movie. I'm pretty sure it's Night of the Living Dead. And he gets, of course, attacked by zombies, and he dies. Really original concept, while also harkening back to the homage to that classic horror. And it's nice that Creepshow has gotten some of these other IPs to play around with. I mean, granted, Night of the Living Dead's in the public domain, but still, cool nonetheless to see that movie get brought back into the mainstream. And the whole revenge plot in this worked and lended its hand really well to the subject material of this guy fantasizing about this woman in the movie. He gets his chance to fantasize with her for realsies, and then of course the wife finds out and does the murder deed, if you will, to her husband. This was one of the strongest episodes in the season. It's hard. I don't know if Dead and Breakfast or this one's my favorite. I might be really close in a tie there. This one definitely would be the best case scenario for like a modern adaptation of Creepshow as a theatrical release, because it has like the character development that's needed. It really fleshed out the idea within those 40 minutes, but also the technology, the effect of him going into these movies is such a cool idea, and it was achieved really, really well. And I'm glad that Creepshow was able to pull this one off, because in concept, this sounds like a really difficult idea. But in execution, pretty good, especially for a Shudder show, which, not to say that Shudder doesn't have money, but I can only imagine that Shudder does not have the resources that, say, Hulu or Netflix does. To pull this kind of episode off was really nice to see. And with that being the final episode, it makes me wonder what other cool surprises could be lurking around the corner for Season 3. So, with all of that talking said, I blabbed your ear off. Thank you if you're still listening, by the way. That's my thoughts on every segment, every episode from Creepshow Season 2. Like with Season 1, like with the animated special, like with the Christmas special, Season 2 was a blast. I have been a Creepshow fan for years. I love the morality stuff that it plays around with, mixed with the comic relief, mixed with the comic book tie-ins, and now it appears with other horror movie and horror IP tie-ins, intellectual properties IP. It's really exciting to see all of this come together, especially on a platform like Shudder. And with a lot of these mainstream shows, they're not able to do the weirdness that Creepshow is able to do. And so I applaud the producers, I applaud the directors behind these segments, and the writers for offering unique stuff for horror fans to eat up. I can't wait for Season 3. Go back and watch my reviews of the other Creepshow stuff if you haven't. If you want to see reviews of Season 3, or the animated special, or other Shudder content, let me know in the comments down below. And again, what was your favorite segment from Creepshow Season 2? Let me know. Thank you for watching, and remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.